Few could have foreseen that the treaty meant to end all wars would, in fact, sow the seeds for another global conflict just 2 decades later. Yet the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, did exactly that. It was a document riddled with contradictions, born from a complex web of wartime promises, national interests, and personal ambitions. While the treaty aimed to redraw the map of Europe and ensure lasting peace, it was ultimately undermined by a series of secret betrayals that poisoned the well of international relations for years to come. The story of these betrayals is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the aftermath of great victories, the pursuit of narrow self-interest can have devastating consequences. We will delve into the shadows of the Paris Peace Conference, exploring the lesser-known acts of deception and their lasting impact on global politics. By understanding the flaws of the past, we can perhaps hope to build a more stable and peaceful future. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in the opulent Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, officially ended the First World War. Germany, deemed the aggressor, was forced to accept responsibility for the war and shoulder the burden of reparations. The treaty redrew national borders, carved new states out of fallen empires, and established the League of Nations, a body intended to prevent future conflicts. However, beneath the veneer of this seemingly straightforward agreement lay a tangled web of hidden agendas and broken promises. Negotiations for the treaty were dominated by the Big Three: Woodrow Wilson of the United States, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, and Georges Clemenceau of France. Each leader arrived in Paris with their own vision for the post-war world, shaped by their nation's wartime experiences and ambitions. Wilson, an idealist, championed self-determination and a just peace. Lloyd George, pragmatic and politically astute, sought to secure British interests and contain German power. Clemenceau, known as Le Tigre, was driven by a desire for revenge and security for France, which had suffered immensely during the war. These conflicting objectives, often pursued behind closed doors, created a breeding ground for mistrust and betrayal. The resulting treaty, far from being a truly collective effort, became a patchwork of compromises and concessions, some made in good faith, others shrouded in secrecy and driven by self-interest. The Paris Peace Conference was, from the outset, a monumental undertaking. Delegates from over 30 nations gathered to negotiate the terms of peace, each with their own grievances, aspirations, and demands. This clash of interests, often diametrically opposed, made finding common ground a near impossible task. While the defeated powers were excluded from the negotiations, ensuring their resentment, even among the victors, unity was in short supply. France, scarred by the war's devastation and fearful of German resurgence, demanded harsh reparations and significant territorial concessions. Great Britain, wary of French dominance on the continent, favoured a more lenient approach towards Germany, one that would allow for economic recovery and prevent future instability. Wilson, meanwhile, clung to his idealistic vision of a world governed by collective security and self-determination, often at odds with the more pragmatic concerns of his European counterparts. This fundamental disagreement over the treatment of Germany, coupled with secret agreements made during the war, created a climate of suspicion and mistrust that permeated the negotiations. The stage was set for a series of betrayals that would have far-reaching consequences. Behind closed doors, secret pacts and broken promises. One of the most egregious betrayals of the Treaty of Versailles lay in the numerous secret agreements concluded during the war itself. These pacts, often made out of desperation or expediency, directly contradicted the principles of open diplomacy and self-determination that Wilson championed. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, for instance, secretly carved up the Ottoman Empire between Britain and France, promising them control over territories already inhabited by Arab populations. This betrayal of Arab aspirations for independence fueled resentment and instability in the Middle East for decades to come. Similarly, Italy's entry into the war on the side of the Allies had been secured through the Treaty of London in 1915, which promised them territorial gains in the Adriatic. However, Wilson's staunch opposition to this secret deal, which violated his principle of self-determination, led to heated disputes during the peace negotiations. Italy felt betrayed by its wartime allies, their sacrifices seemingly forgotten. These examples illustrate how wartime expediency and the pursuit of national interest trumped principles and sowed the seeds of future conflict. The secret agreements, when brought to light, poisoned the atmosphere at Versailles and undermined the legitimacy of the treaty itself. The unmasking when trust crumbled in the halls of Versailles. The moment when the fragility of trust at Versailles became undeniably clear was perhaps during the presentation of the treaty's terms to the German delegation in May 1919. The Germans, expecting a negotiated settlement based on Wilson's 14 points, were instead confronted with a diktat, a dictated peace that they perceived as humiliating and unjust. The treaty's harsh terms, particularly the war guilt clause and the crippling reparations, were seen as a betrayal not only of Germany, but also of the spirit of reconciliation that many had hoped would guide the post-war order. Public outrage in Germany at the perceived Versailles diktat fueled resentment towards the victorious powers, particularly France. This anger and humiliation created fertile ground for nationalist and revanchist movements, ultimately contributing to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The German reaction to the treaty served as a stark reminder of the importance of fairness and transparency in international relations. While Germany undeniably bore responsibility for the war, the harshness of the treaty, combined with the secrecy surrounding its negotiation, ultimately proved counterproductive, fostering resentment and undermining the possibility of lasting peace.